But so far we haven't succeeded, so please walk slowly to your seat. Before we begin, I just want to remind you that I'm the moderator, and so tonight I will let you know who won at the end of the evening, and whether in fact religion is good or not. Please don't allow any past associations to deceive you. I am totally objective moderator on this evening. And now, the person who is responsible for putting this evening together, our Men's Club president, Farshad Rafi.
Thank you. It takes Rabbi Wolpe to get the Men's Club meeting started on time. I think in my years here, this is the first time. Thank you, Rabbi. Good evening. Welcome. I'm thrilled to see you all and so many new faces. In particular, I want to welcome a group of Professor Shermer's students who are sitting in that row. You just dropped the average age in the room and probably doubled IQ. So, welcome. This is our monthly meeting, a little bit of commercial and Men's Club. We have these kinds of learning events. We are fortunate to have such incredible people join us almost every month. So if you're not a member, please consider joining. There are application forms at the registration desk, and Whitney can direct you. It's the best deal in town. It's only $85 a year, and you don't have to be a member of Sinai Temple to become a member of the Men's Club. And you get every meeting a dinner or appetizer. So please join us and help us improve our programming. The next meeting, by the way, will be on October 16th. It's a Wednesday. Also different like tonight from our normal first Tuesday of the month meeting. We will have Rabbi Elliot Dorff from American Jewish University, who will be talking about Jewish law and ethics. Is there a conflict? Interesting and provocative topic. He will also talk about the Masorti conservative movement and share some information with us. A couple of other events before we move forward. Men's Club's own Rick Richmond, long time member, he is who is author of an incredible book, acclaimed book called Racing Against History, the 1940 Campaign for Jewish Army to Fight Hitler. Fascinating story of how three major Zionist personalities tried to raise funds and get the US government to help create a Jewish army in the 40s. We'll be giving a talk called The Three American Jewish Leaders You Should Know More About, Justice Louis Brandeis, Ben Hecht, and Norman Pothort. The event will take place at Young Israel Century City at 6:30 p.m. October 10th. Registration deadline, however, is September 28th. There are flyers at the registration desk if you're interested. Some of you have asked about our dear friend Michael Silverstein. Just a quick update. He unfortunately is back in the hospital undergoing another round of treatment. We've been visiting him in the hospital. His mood is good, it's great. He loves to see visitors. So go see him, talk to him, and pray for him. It worked once, it can work again. I just want to ask briefly, Carrie Lerman, if you could just say a few words about a very important trip Men's Club is going on.
I want to mention a really important opportunity for all of us. A few years ago, the Men's Club organized a trip to Azerbaijan, and it was led by Rabbi Wolpe. And the purpose of that trip was to bring a Sefer Torah to the Mountain Jews, to tell them that they're not alone, that we're here to support them. But the other purpose of the trip was basically to thank the government of Azerbaijan for their close relationship with Israel, their trade relationship with Israel, their military cooperation with Israel. And in fact, I just heard the other day that the ministers of the government of Azerbaijan remember our trip, our mission from Sinai Temple, where we had 50 people going there, and it still has an effect on that government. Well, what are we doing now? In November, we are going to Paris. Yes, we'll see the Eiffel Tower. Yes, we'll take a trip on the Seine, but that's not why we're going. We're going because ELNet, which is the European equivalent of AIPAC, ELNet has one mission, and that is to promote Israel relations with European governments. That is a tough sell these days, and what they are doing is quite critical. So in November, they're having their second annual policy conference, and we're putting together a mission. Again, Rabbi Wolpe is leading it, and we have a number of people from Sinai Temple who are going, and we would like to get even more. This is a really important time for us to stand up, to go to Paris, not simply to have a good time, but to say to the people, to the Jews of Paris, that we here in Los Angeles know what they're going through, know the challenges, and we're here to support them. And we also want to say to the French government, the German government, the other governments whose representatives will be at this conference, that we want to see more movement towards supporting Israel. Just very recently, the German government passed a BDS resolution equating BDS with anti-Semitism. Very important. ELNet is now working with France for France to adopt a similar type of resolution. We're there to support those efforts. So I encourage you all to sign up. The conference is November 6th to 14th. The trip is November 6th to the 14th. It's a 2.5-day conference. It's an opportunity to meet the leaders of the Jewish community in France, an opportunity to meet and talk with the policymakers, the government officials of the countries of Europe, and to make your voice known. If not now, when? It's our responsibility, not just to sit back and let others speak for us or hope that others will go forward and speak. This is our chance to go to Paris and to advocate on behalf of the State of Israel. So in the back there we have applications. If anyone has any questions, just come to me after the meeting tonight. We'll talk about it. But come with us, and it will be an experience that you will not forget. Thanks.
Thank you. I hope you will join us. Before we get started, I want to recognize a couple other people. The president of Sephardic Temple Qumran, Nick Farjan, please stand up, welcome here. And our own president, Jamie, did I see you? Jamie Berman was here a minute ago. Anyway, welcome, Qumran. We hope to be able to have partnerships in programs moving forward. This is a record to get to our presentation for tonight. I'd like you to know I'm usually a lot more long-winded than this. Tonight's program, Relevance of Religion Today, is really quite timely. Elections tomorrow in Israel hinge on this issue of relevance of religion to modern society. Really, I'm excited that we have this distinguished panel here, moderated by our own Rabbi Wolpe. It's become kind of a cliche at Sinai Temple when introducing Rabbi Wolpe to say that he doesn't need an introduction, and that's really true. He doesn't, but I have to say personally, every time I hear Rabbi Wolpe say anything, I walk away enriched and I learn something. So It's really a privilege to be a member of this community. I mean, how many other synagogues do you know where the senior rabbi will host a debate that will question the relevance of religion? So we're really lucky for that. One of our panelists closest to me is Mr. Scott Shay. Scott, it's wonderful having you here. Scott is a leading businessman, thought leader, and the author of 2 widely read books. He co-founded this Signature Bank in 2001, which has become a leading bank in New York for private business owners. Scott's second book, In Good Faith, Questioning Religion and Atheism, is available for sale there in the back. Has been recognized as one of the best books in 2018 by Mosaic Authors and earned a finalist award from National Jewish Books. Our other panelist is Dr. Michael Shermer. He's a college professor, founder and publisher of Skeptic magazine. Some copies of there are available if you want to pick it up. He's the host of the Science Salon podcast, a presidential fellow at Chapman University, and for 18 years, a columnist for Scientific American. He is the author of a number of New York Times best-selling books, including Why People Believe Weird Things. Weird title. The Moral Arc, another book, How Science Leads Humanity Towards Truth, Justice, and Freedom. That is also for sale in the back, and I believe another one of your books, Michael. And his latest book called Heavens on Earth. So we'll have a short introduction by each of the panelists and questions by Rabbi Wolpe, at the end of which we'll open to Q&A by everybody. Thank you.
Good evening and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to argue tonight that religion is relevant and will always remain so, including the religion that I claim that Dr. Shermer even unconsciously practices.
Closer to the mic, please.
Oh, should I start over?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for having me. I'm going to argue tonight that religion is relevant and will always remain so, including the religion that I will argue that Dr. Shermer himself unconsciously practices. The reason is simple. Nobody operates entirely based on what they know for certain, and nobody can prove everything they believe in. We all have faith in something. It has been that way since man has had consciousness, and it will be that way as long as humans are on this earth. Dr. Shermer and other atheists I argue that Dr. Shermer and the other major atheist authors totally misunderstand our reality. The choice is not between religion and reason. The choice is between good faith, believing what is rational but not provable, and bad faith, believing in lies, or what the Bible calls idolatry. Now, most people, including the folks in this room, probably think that idolatry is merely some sort of quaint, harmless bowing down to statues or believing in pantheons of gods that are made for movies or magic making. In fact, idolatry is the most dangerous practice in the world. That's the whole reason the Bible came to be. And if you remember one thing from me tonight, remember this. Idolatry is a set of lies about power. It is inherently irrational to ascribe superpowers or super authority to finite beings, i.e. individuals like us, or ideologies, natural processes, or in the ancient world, animals. In contrast, monotheism, whether you believe in God or not, is rational because it ascribes super authority and superpower to that which is infinite, as it is known in the Kabbalah, Ein Sof, without end. So while we may have thought that we beat idolatry 3,300 years ago with the defeat of the god king Pharaoh, and so we could all eat. It is, in fact, idolatry is alive and well. Just think about the 20th century, which was a catalog of god king pharaohs. Stalin, Hitler, Pol Pot, Mao, the Assad family, the Kim family, and it goes on and on and on. Human societies across history have deified leaders and or themselves, and therefore thereby declared themselves above the law. To be a god is to do one's will without limits, to kill who one pleases, to enslave who one wishes, to steal what one wants, and to abuse who one wants. That is how Stalin was able to order and celebrate the murder of the kulaks, starved a quarter of the Ukraine, and condemned tens of millions of people to the gulag, and sadly so much more. That is the way of all ancient and modern god-king pharaohs. Yet such tyrants still have a fundamental paradox. All humans, including themselves, are limited by their humanity. So, from Pharaoh to Stalin, dictators have masked their reality by using poetry, pageants, myths, parades, theater, and most of all, demonstrations of brutality, all to make believe that they are like gods. Stalin famously had his image projected by the Soviet Space Agency into the cosmos. And the followers of the god kings not only believe in this pageantry, but through participating in it, they get to feel like a taste of their imagined God's power. Idolatry works on a macro basis, but also on a micro basis. Of our everyday encounters. How did Charlie Rose, Matt Lauer, Kevin Spacey, Harvey Weinstein, and too many others succeed in abusing and brutalizing so many? It is because they successfully set themselves up as gods or idols, whose authority over other creators was super authority. They were unquestioned and unquestionable within their industries and their companies. And sadly, before they were brought to justice, they destroyed many a career. But ultimately, like all idols, they could be toppled, of course, with no guarantee of success and with tremendous risks to those who try. When I was working on Wall Street, I once carpooled with a mid-level bond trader. And in these rides downtown, I got to hear his philosophy. And he basically believed that the only person important was himself, and maybe to some degree his family. Nothing wrong with cheating on your partner, no problem, as long as you don't get caught. Nothing wrong if you have the power and the smarts to beat the system with taking from your client, hurting who you might want to hurt, climbing your way up, as long as two things happen. You can keep it secret, or the party can't retaliate who you're hurting. In his worldview, there was no human equality, and he was the only deity in his mind. And I could go on and on because we could all think of people who deify themselves. So Dr. Shermer, along with Steven Pinker and Peter Singer and Daniel Dennett and Richard Hawkins and a host of others, claim that where we get our morals are from reason and science. I'm here to tell you they're wrong. Reason alone can lead us to all sorts of idolatry. Reason is a way of thinking based on logic and observed reality. Science is a methodology based on observation and experimentation. Neither are sources of morality. Peter Singer, a leading atheist moral philosopher, argues on rational grounds, cost and suffering, that gravely or severely handicapped children should be euthanized until they make it to a certain age. I personally spoke with the medical director of a leading insurance company who explained to me that if we stopped providing medical care for infants below 30 days, all but routine care, just routine care for infants below 30 days or the elderly, we could save enough money to send everyone to college for free. We could actually fund Bernie Sanders' dream. These are, by the way, perfectly reasoned and reasonable calculations because they are logical and they are based on observed reality, and they're empirical. However, they require someone at some point who believes they know enough to decide who lives and who dies, who gets to play God. And this, and I hope we'll go into this in detail later, is how rational, secular thinkers can slip into idolatry. So it is no wonder that the age of reason, the enlightenment that's glorified in Dr. Shermer's well-written book, as well as in Enlightenment Tao by Steven Pinker, ushered in, at the same time, scientific racism, scientific sexism, and justified colonialism. And these authors are not just wrong about reason, they're actually wrong about history. Voltaire, who's approvingly quoted in all of these books, wrote that blacks are not men except in their stature, with a faculty of speech and thought at a fair degree far distant to ours. Kant wrote a marriage that he is the party to obey, she is the party to, he is the party to direct, she is the party to obey. Sorry, you might say I've inculcated equality, so maybe that's just that's my ear. But clearly it was a broad sexist. He viewed women as being of lower status, not being able to hold jobs, not being able to do virtually anything other than serve one's husband. By the way, he also talked about the Jews a lot. And he wrote, "I shall not engage in the futile undertaking and lecturing to these people in terms of morality." He also wrote, "The Jews deserve to be punished." One can argue that Kant actually provided sort of the original germ for Nazi philosophy. Rousseau wrote, "Men and women are not equal. It's the part of the one to be active and the other to be passive and weak," referring to women. And Kant, by the way, just coming back to him again, wrote that the feelings of the Negroes are but a trifling, not to be paid attention to. These are direct quotes. I might have changed a word or two in summarizing them, but these are direct quotes. The list goes on and on and on. By the 19th century, scientific racism set the stage for racial hygiene, forced sterilizations, and euthanasia. It was during the Enlightenment that the slave trade hit its peak. And there were no shortage of Enlightenment thinkers who backed colonialism. The whole scramble for Africa, which started in 1881 and was over before World War I, was an Enlightenment project. And it was reasoned because Enlightenment thinkers thought that if the white man had achieved so much technologically, he was surely superior to others and deserved to take over Africa. So how does Dr. Shermer and other atheist authors who glorify the Enlightenment account for this checkered history? They don't. For we contradict the argument that reason alone is the source of good. Nor do these authors account for why. The Bible, on the other hand, the text so thoroughly misread and misrepresented by these atheist authors, has an answer for why both religious and secular people go off the deep end and create much harm. And that is, again, idolatry. It is the Bible that gives us the conceptual foundation to prevent all the evils we have described. It is the Bible that states that we are created bestselling Elohim, with a divine spark, in God's image. To express this rationally, our human knowledge is simply too limited to judge any other person's work. So we believe in good faith that we have to treat each other as equal. And it is this point that creates the conceptual foundation for the golden rule. For if we do not recognize human equality, we can't treat others as equal. Hillel summarized and said he was summarizing the entire Bible. And he did this over 2,000 years ago. He said, "Do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you. The rest is commentary. Go learn it." No wonder the Bible inspired so many leaders of progressive movements for political and legal equality. As Eric Nelson, a Harvard professor, wrote, our contemporary freedoms were not inspired by Voltaire, but by Deuteronomy, which modeled the Hebrew Republic. The Bible inspired the abolitionists, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, the protests in Eastern Europe, the protests today in Hong Kong, and many more. The Bible also gives us a key to understanding when religion goes off track. And this is something also to pay attention to that we certainly should as Jews, which is the third of the 10 Commandments, which says, don't take God's name b'sham. Don't take God's name in vain. What does this mean? Don't ever trust anyone who sets themselves up as a sole spokesperson for God. Because when that happens, that's when horrors happen. The excesses from the Crusades to the Inquisition, just like the excesses of reason, can be explained by some form of idolatry. So, in conclusion, I've presented to you the monotheistic take on the importance of the Bible and a recognition that when we don't believe in God, we can end up deifying all sorts of dangerous notions and harming all sorts of people. Idolatry, sadly, is humanity's default mode, which is why the Bible needed to come into existence. And none of the atheist authors have an overarching understanding of evil and why, and that is why, frankly, they spend a lot of time talking about it, but in my view, not with a coherent answer. So I'm asking you tonight and forever to not be misled by ideology masquerading as science. Thank you.
Well, that was mighty interesting. I didn't know I was an unconscious believer. I was once a conscious believer. Now apparently it's gone Freudian on me. If somebody could bring me a cup of ice water, that would be terrific. I had a little throat surgery last week, so I'm going to keep it hydrated there. And a shout out to my class from Chapman. Yay, glad you guys made it. And my two new friends from Santa Barbara. I just moved to Santa Barbara a couple years ago. They drove all the way down here just for today. Thank you, David. And Scott, I read your book. As Patton said, you magnificent bastard, I read your book. No, the problem. Already, all right. Yeah, I knew what you were going to say, yeah. Actually, let me just make a few comments before the opening question is religion still relevant in the 21st century? No. Thank you. Just a few comments that I must respond. This is sort of presentism, historicism here. The whole Nazi regime and ideology does not come from the Enlightenment. It comes from the anti-Enlightenment, the German Romanticism movement, the blood and soil movement that generates this idea that there is such a thing as race, and the soil that the race lives on has special, almost supernatural properties to it. This is anti-Enlightenment. The Enlightenment had a pushback in the 19th century that you can track the ideological thread from Haeckel and the German sort of naturalists all the way to, not Hitler directly, but his sort of ideological philosophers, if you want to call them that. So that's incorrect. And I think to say that there's such a thing as good faith, bad faith, well, what do you mean by faith? I mean, we use this word in particular for a reason, and it isn't reason. It's that you believe things when there is no reason for it. If you have a reason for it, then just state the reasons. Full stop. You don't need to use the word faith. The whole point of having faith is that you can't prove it. And to say that, well, we can't prove anything, it's all faith, that's also incorrect. There's lots of things we know for certain mathematical truths, logical truths, or things we're highly confident in that are true. The Big Bang happened, evolution happened, climate change, vaccinations, germ theory of disease, all the way down to the things we're not too certain about, like what is consciousness, and those sorts of things. So, you know, there's a gradation of truths, from objective external truths to subjective internal truths, that the one are more supported by reasons, the other, at the extreme end, you can't prove at all, they're just internal. My favorite example, since my students just heard this lecture, is, you know, when I say dark chocolate is better than milk chocolate, that's absolutely true. In my head, but, you know, maybe not in your head, or Stairway to Heaven is the greatest rock song of all time. I'm not sure I can prove that. That's an internal truth. Well, in between these sort of objective external truths and internal subjective truths is a whole range of things that we make arguments for. And, you know, it's often said we now live, post-Trump, in the post-truth era. So let me ask you something. Is the statement, we're living in a post-truth era, true? You see where I'm going with this? The moment you open your mouth, you've lost the argument. Because you're using reason and arguments to make your case, one way or the other. We're not living in a post-truth world. We still use reason and arguments. That's not faith. Okay, so not all of us operate on faith. Let me say a few words about two of the words in the statement, religion and relevant. By relevant, I think we all mean relevant to me personally, relevant to us socially, as a society, a culture, a political entity like the nation, whatever. That's what we mean by relevant. Does religion make a difference? Clearly it makes a difference to a lot of people. But what do we mean by religion? So this is a huge word, and people throw this around. I mean, you can clearly distinguish that from belief in God. Lots of people do not believe in God, and they're religious. Most of my Jewish friends are atheists. They're secular Jews, cultural Jews, or whatever. They practice, didn't think I was going to get a shout out for that, but okay. You know, they practice the culture or the mores. The myths and the stories have value, but they don't believe in any supernatural element to it. Okay, so that's an important distinction to make. You can still be a pure rationalist, secularist, based on reason and science, and have some form of religion. Clearly that happens, and that's good and healthy as long as it leads to behavior that is, you know, acceptable, doesn't harm others, and so on. You know, my moral standing, we start with the survival and flourishing of sentient beings, and if you move in the one direction that leads to their suffering, then that's bad. If it leads to their flourishing, then that's good. I mean, it's kind of a simple way of just starting off with that. Jeremy Bentham articulated this well in his great book on utilitarianism, when he was talking about animal rights. It's not can they talk or can they reason, but can they suffer? It's the suffering of other sentient beings that we care about. So to the extent that religion moves us away from that, that's good. Doesn't, that's not good. Now, then there is, like on the dating site, I'm spiritual but not religious. Okay, so there's like a spiritual element to the human condition that also matters. That you may get from different elements of religion, but you may get from science. I get my spirituality from visiting astronomical observatories around the world. This is one of my favorite things to do. You can do that. You just go right up Highway 2 to the top of Mount Wilson, and you can visit the telescopes where Edmund Hubble discovered the expanding universe and the existence, evidence for the Big Bang, and so forth, and that we're not the only galaxy in the universe. This is spectacular. In LA. This is amazing. It's the first time anyone said, let's put a telescope at the top of a mountain. All right, so that to me has as much spiritual, emotive value as cathedrals do, and I like visiting European cathedrals. My wife is from Cologne, Germany, so we go to the dome there. It's magnificent. I feel just like I do visiting Mount Wilson. So you can get that from various ways. You don't need the supernatural element to it. It just means being in awe and wonder at something bigger than you. And clearly that's also rational, scientific, reasonable, secular, or religious, whatever. You can get that from many different ways. Now, if we're talking about, let's talk about personal health for a moment. There's much made about the idea that religious people live longer, that they recover quicker from surgeries and diseases and hospitalizations and so on, that they have healthier lifestyles, they score slightly higher on happiness scales. Okay, but again, what do you mean by religion? Okay, and it's discussed as if God is favoring those who believe, and therefore they get longer lives, slightly, about 5 years, or they score, 1 point higher in the happiness scale. No, it has nothing to do with that. Or they give more money, they make more donations or whatever. Atheist spouses of a spouse who's religious, they get the pull up, they get tugged up as well. So it's being part of a community, some kind of a social organization. This is called social capital. That seems to make the difference, that makes people feel better. Having somebody who cares about you, who loves you, that says, don't eat the second slice of cheesecake, honey. Don't smoke, and don't forget to exercise, work out every day. So those kinds of behaviors make people healthier, live longer, and so forth. And that's what's making the difference. That's what's pulling the numbers up. So instead of saying religion in this kind of mystical sense, let's break it down like a scientist would. What exactly are we talking about here? In terms of social value, the idea that nations or societies that are religious do better. Okay, this is a simple empirical question. You can study it yourself. Just look up the 20 most religious democracies in the world. Number 1, United States. And then just scale it all the way down to Sweden and some of the Northern European countries that are super low in religiosity. These are scored by church attendance, self-reported belief in God, self-reported number of days a week that they read their religious scriptures. Do you have a Bible in the home? Those sorts of things. And then look at any number of societal health measures, like suicides, homicides, STD rates, abortion rates, teen pregnancy rates, infant mortality rates, and so on. Off the charts, the worst of the 20 is the United States, in every measure. Now, I'm not claiming that religion causes gun violence, suicides, homicides, STDs, pregnancy, and so on. But if your claim is that religion makes societies healthier, it isn't working very well here in the most religious country in the Western world. Whatever it's doing, it's not doing that. Okay? So there's something else that does that. No, we're not going to talk politics tonight, but having a society structured in a way where everybody is taken care of one way or the other. If you prefer private charity versus public social systems, fine. But that idea that a nation takes care of its people seems to make a big difference. Anyway, that's all I'll say politically on that. Finally, I think, just to wrap it up, again, religion is such a broad word, but the idea that religious texts bring value to people individually and to communities and societies is certainly true. Now, from a scientist's perspective, when we say, is it really true? That's a different kind of question than is it mythically true, or is it morally true, or does it have a psychological truth to it? And here I would make a distinction between scientific facts and, say, literary facts or mythic facts. So, I mean, no one would argue that Harry Potter or a Jane Austen novel or a Shakespeare play, no one would ask, are they true? And neither would I bother to ask, well, did Moses really exist? Was there really an exile? And so forth is, in my opinion, missing the point of the story. The story is not meant to be an accurate historical account, and therefore it's either right or wrong. So I've been recently doing some debates with Jordan Peterson, who's really into myths and archetypes and Jung and Freud and Nietzsche and all this. Okay. So when you ask me, do you believe in God? And I say no. And you ask Jordan, do you believe in God? He said, well, that would take me about 40 hours to answer. He and I are talking at different levels here, but what do you mean, is it true, or do you believe it's true? So if you say, like, did someone named Jesus exist? Probably, historically. Was he crucified? Probably. The Romans crucified everybody just for fun. I mean, it was just public entertainment. Okay, that's probably true. Was he resurrected? Okay. This is a much trickier thing to answer, obviously, historically, but it would be the most extraordinary claim perhaps ever made. And extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. 100 billion people have lived and died before the 7.5 billion of us alive today. Now, one of them has come back from the dead, or maybe one. Okay, how good is the evidence that the one did and none of the others did? So, not very good. It's ordinary, barely. For the most extraordinary claim. Okay, so to wrap it up. But if you mean we should all bear the burden of carrying our own cross because life is hard, and we should forgive people who sin against us, and life is difficult, so we should bond together and have a kind of a community like that, then yes, that's a kind of truth I could get on board with. If you want to call it religion, fine. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's kind of a human, social way to be. Thank you.
Okay, before I get to questions for both of you, let me just answer one definitively that Michael Shermer asked. No, Jesus was not resurrected. Just wanted to clear that up here in the synagogue.
I can tell my Christian friends.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, many of you know the well-worn Jewish joke about the rabbi who two people come in front of to plead a case. The first one pleads the case, he goes, "You're right." The second one pleads the case, he goes, "You're right." His wife says, "They can't both be right." He goes, "You're right too." Well, let me reverse that. You're wrong, and you're wrong, and I'm probably wrong too, but I want to start with Scott Shay since he began and tell you why I think you're wrong. Even though essentially I agree with you. First of all, the problem with making idolatry a secular sin and talking about something like Charlie Rose is the Catholic Church. Because when you have a pedophilia run rampant among religious figures that a religious system allows to happen, then you have to realize that idolatry is not a sin of the secular world. And in fact, one of the interesting byways of this is when you say Kant might have been responsible for the Nazis, actually, it was not at all Kant who was responsible for the Nazis. You want to trace it back, it goes back to the most important religious figure in German history, which is Martin Luther, who told the Germans to lock the Jews in their synagogues and burn them down because they rejected Jesus, i.e., they rejected the exact ultimate claim that you say, recognizing ultimacy, is the antidote to idolatry, but in fact, in a case like this, what it becomes is the spark of genocide. Now, if you want to say in every case, well, when people act well, they're not following idolatry, but even when religious people act badly, it's idolatry, then I have to think that your claim vanishes to almost nothing. Unless you can establish criteria for which anyone can be an idolater or a non-idolater, whether they are religious or not, that's really clear and consistent, then I think the claim that secular people are idolaters and religious people aren't doesn't stand up historically.
So, in terms, can you hear me? This one? Okay, great. So, I'm not here to defend pedophile priests. Red hand. I'm not here to defend pedophile priests, red-handed rabbis, of which we have plenty, caught red-handed, inflammatory imams. But I do think that the Bible clearly, and I don't think it's a subtle point, talks about false prophets, calls out religious leaders in garb. All of our prophetic books basically distinguish that. No, if you're taking God's name in vain, again, the third commandment, if you're saying what I'm doing is okay because I'm a priest, or what I'm doing is okay because somehow I have a superpower or super authority because I'm a rabbi, well, you are just a idolater in monotheist clock. You might have a really nice costume, but it's not going to get you anywhere. I'll give you a personal example that really, really hurt me personally, and I'll summarize it. It's in the book. But there was a fellow who, when I was involved in a company where we bought a loan from a fellow who clearly looked like a very fervently Orthodox sort of person by his garb. And ultimately it turns out that this person stole money, lied to the company, lied to the bankruptcy trustee, and when it came time for his deposition, our lawyer had asked, and I want to say I was the only Jew involved in this. Our lawyer said, Mr. So-and-so, you look like a religious person, and yet, how did you break 2 of the 10 commandments? You lied and you stole, and actually a third, you made false witness, because he lied to the bankruptcy trustee. And then that person gave a very technical answer as to why he hadn't done it. And when this was reported back to me in a room of 20 people, everyone turned and looked at me like, you're the Jew in the room, How are you going to explain this to us? It was almost like a sitcom. Everybody's head turned toward me. And my first reaction, honestly, as a Jew, was to dive under the table. And then I thought about it, and I'll tell you what I said, which is that you can't, this person is not a religious Jew. He likes dressing like a religious Jew, but he may as well go out and have a bacon cheeseburger, because he's not following. He wasted his time studying Torah. He's not doing that. You cannot pray in the morning in the synagogue and then pray on people on the rest of the day.
But then my question to you is, and I don't think, maybe I didn't ask it well enough to get the answers I was looking for. What use is the category of idolatry if you're religious, being a non-idolater means you behave morally, and if you're secular, being a non-idolater means you behave morally? It sounds to me like what you're saying an idolater is someone who behaves badly, and a non-idolater is someone who behaves well.
No. What I say is that there are basically 4 categories. I am perfectly happy to make common cause with atheists who go by the golden rule. What I said before, don't do unto others what you don't want done unto yourself. I am totally happy with them, and I do make common cause. But atheists who don't believe that tend to be very Machiavellian, because...
But is that idolatry? Does that have anything to do with idolatry?
Yes, let me just...
So the atheist who believes in the golden rule is not an idolater?
That's correct.
Because?
Because they believe that we all share a spark of humanity. They're going to treat each other as ontologically equal, and I'm okay. It's not like the trader who thought, okay, I want to just get away with whatever I can get away with, as long as I don't get caught. And look good, I'm going to make donations to the right political people. I'm going to kiss up to the right people.
I understand your moral distinctions. I just don't understand why they have to be called idolatry. This guy's a jerk. He's not deifying himself. He's just saying...
He's the only one that counts.
He's not the only one that counts. He cares about other people. He just doesn't care about you.
Well, actually...
Yeah, seriously. I care about my family. I care about my community. I don't care about you. So if I cheat you, how does that make me an idolater? It makes me a jerk.
It makes you, in my definition, you are, but it would make him a jerk too. And indeed, he's not the sort of fellow I would invite to my Shabbat table. But I would invite to the Shabbat table someone who doesn't believe in God, is not just a 6 but a 7.
I understand that you like good people.
But doesn't self-deify themselves. That's what I think the essence of the golden rule is. And by the way, anybody who's religious, and we see plenty of them, that self-deify themselves with religious garb, I think they're just as dangerous, if not more so. We had a mini Holocaust when Ayatollah Khomeini said that the Baha'i needed to be essentially exterminated. And that was because he made himself the sole spokesperson for God. And people do that on all sorts of levels. Of course,
I'm just beating a dead horse here. But it's not true that he made himself the sole spokesperson for God because he wanted to kill the Baha'i. He had other people, other imams who agreed with him, a court, a community, lots of people agreed. I just don't find that your model tracks, but I'm going to now disagree with your model. I'm not. So Shermer.
I rest my case.
So what I want to ask you is, I understand that you can have an experience of awe from looking at cathedrals without anything supernatural, but I don't think we framed the debate so much around whether there is a God or not, which would be an interesting and worthwhile debate. It was about whether religion has utility, and at least in my experience, the difference between religious communities and non-religious communities, less on a social, societal level, because I think it's unfair to compare Switzerland with the United States, a homogeneous small society with a vast, diverse one. You're going to get different results no matter what. But in terms of motivating people to goodness, I think there is no engine in the world like religion. The largest charity, everybody here has heard about Doctors Without Borders. But the largest charity in the United States by far is called World Vision, which is an evangelical charity out of the Northwest United States. No one knows about it, but people, when I went to Haiti to help a friend build an orphanage, I met people there who had been there 20, 25, 30 years, and when you say why, they say, well, because this is where Jesus wants me to be. And I think that discounting the enormous good day to day that religion does, that you can't get motivated the same way by great art or by going to the Griffith Observatory, is to overlook an enormous social engine without which the world would be much poorer.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point. But I think we're talking about two different things here. Spirituality in the form of awe versus sort of religious concern for helping the poor and the needy. These are different things. Religion certainly has orchestrated the most well-organized private form of, say, welfare, Social Security, helping the poor, and so on. And it's only really since the Second World War that governments have started ramping up the levels of social spending. It is, by the way, on average, across those 20 industrialized democracies I mentioned, about 20%, between 18 and 24% of GDP every year that governments spend on social spending of all kinds, wealth transfers to help the needy. And we are at about 21%. Canada is about 19%, by the way. So-called socialist Canada versus individual capitalist America. We actually spend higher percentage of our GDP. Now, to what extent does private spending...
We're better people.
That's right, yeah. We care more.
We care more. That's right.
So yes, clearly we need both. I think the heavy lifting is still depending, I mean, as a former libertarian or still classical liberal or whatever I am, it pains me to say this, but we need some government to help with that really heavy lifting. So you need both prices. And religion has been really good at that.
Let me go more theoretically and ask Scott's question in I don't know if it's a different form, in sort of the way that he asked it, which is, why should I be good? I mean, religion gives a clear, consistent answer. We are all children of God. Therefore, every human being is in the image of God. Everybody is a spark of God. And I should be good to you the same way that I would be good to your kids if I was your friend, because we have a common ancestor, common whatever. But absent that, can you give me a reason to not cheat him if it's going to benefit me?
Okay, first of all, historically, you can say whatever you want how you interpret biblical scripture, but historically it didn't motivate people to treat others equally across the board.
I just asked you if there was a reason. We can get to whether the reason works or not is a separate, seriously, is a separate question. I'm asking you a question on the level of theory because you have your students here. Just seems fair, right? And they're taking notes, I can see.
Okay, so what's happened historically since the Enlightenment is the idea that everyone is born with equal rights, self-evident truth that all people are equal, okay? That's just a statement that was made that almost no one believed at the time.
Oh, you didn't finish that sentence, though, because they are endowed by their... Creator.
Yes.
Oh, where's your American history? Endowed by their creator.
By nature and nature's God. Okay, what they meant was we're born with a human nature in which we are all to be treated equally. Okay, again, almost no one believed this at the time. You know, Jefferson owned slaves, Washington owned slaves, and so on. They had racist attitudes and so on. And again, it's not the Enlightenment thinkers that we're motivated by. It's their ideas. Clearly, they were flawed people, as are we. If we were having this conversation 2 centuries ago, you and I would probably be justifying slavery and LGBTQ would not have equal rights, and we would argue why they shouldn't, and so on. We've all been pulled up. What have we been pulled up to? Expanding the moral sphere so that everyone has the equal human rights. Everyone. Every human has equal human rights. That's the reason.
What's the reason?
The reason...
It seems like you slipped that in there. You said that's the reason. What is the that?
The that is that we should all be treated equally because that's how each of us would want to be treated.
It sounds like a tautology to me.
Well, it's the golden rule.
We should treat people equally because they should be treated equally.
It's the golden rule.
But what I'm saying is that religion has a reason. Because we're all in the image of God. We're all children of God, and therefore you treat everybody.
Okay, but if they're
help out here.
But not if you're going to help him. If you're going to help me,
he's going to quote from my book. I will allow it.
Well, You may or may not consider this a help, but Dr. Shermer comes up with 10, his own decalogue.
Yeah.
Like, you should have a picture on the front of you coming down. You should have a picture coming down from outside.
Pizza boxes. Yeah.
Two pizza boxes, and you dropped the third, of course. But in any event, all 10 come directly from the Bible. So when I say,
that's fine.
and I'm happy to give you sources to literally every single one of these where I, as I was reading it, I jotted down quotes. So my argument would be, and I think this may be where you're going, Rabbi Wolpe, is I think you have inculcated some of these long traditions that we have that I would argue are biblical. I mean, literally every one of them, including your 10th, I can give you a biblical source.
Okay, the reason is because I wouldn't want to be treated that way.
That's true. Yes.
Okay, but historically, no one gave a crap about what you felt. Historically, we have all inculcated that idea, that this what's called the principle of interchangeable perspectives. I would not want to be treated that way, so I will not treat you that way. Okay, so Rabbi Hillel got it right. Okay, so fine, that's good. Unfortunately, people didn't practice it until recently. But we've all been pulled up. This kind of moral zeitgeist has shifted over the decades. You can pinpoint literary passages down to about the decade they were written over the last century based on how they talk about Jews and women and blacks. What has happened? There's been no reinterpretations of the Old Testament and, what they meant in Leviticus 3:18, when a man lies with another man, he must be stoned. What they meant is that pot should be legalized. That's not what they were. It's not what they were talking about. You can't, in a presentism way, reread the scriptures in modern ears. What's happened is we've all been pulled up with this idea that we want to be treated equally, so therefore we should treat others equally. This principle of interchangeable perspectives. We still don't practice it completely, but we're getting there. Of course. Yeah.
Well, I would make a couple of points. First, I do think that all of the ideas, the fairness principle, love your neighbor as yourself, clearly comes from the Bible. We're all made in God's image, clearly comes from the Bible. Don't oppress the stranger. Remember you were a stranger in Egypt. So be kind to the stranger actually appears 36 times in the Bible. Look out for the other person. Literally, in one point it says, if you have a stranger in need, give them lechem v'tzimlah, bread and shirt. Bread and shirt on their back.
In answer to his, no, I didn't hear him dispute that his principles are in the Bible too. What I understood him to be saying is that didn't change human behavior as much as the gradual evolution of morality did. And so my question to you on behalf of Michael would be,
yes,
what's the difference between today and 100 years ago? It can't just be the Bible, because in fact 100 years ago we knew the Bible better than we do today.
I think that first of all, it depends on your time frame. I'm start
using 100 years.
If you're talking about 100 years, I think that the inculcation of the Bible has been pretty good, because I think all societies, including, we talk in your book, you talk about the Nordic societies, they definitely used biblical influence.
And do you think that's why we're better now than we were then? Because the Bible has filtered its way through Western civilization so that it's more present in 2019 than it was in 1919?
I would say that the fundamentals, I would recommend to everyone, after you've read both of our books, or all three of our books here, to read Eric Nelson's The Hebrew Republic, who essentially argues in the biblical century set the whole era up for individual rights, for limited government, for government caring, etc. And they all looked at the book of, essentially, Samuel, for limited government, etc. And we essentially have a system that John Locke and others clearly and cheerfully agreed was based on the Deuteronomy and the Samuel model of limited government, separate branches, and the like. And so, yes.
Are you comfortable with the idea that the American government was largely based on biblical precedents and teachings?
No, of course not. It was because it wasn't. It was grounded in these Enlightenment ideas from Locke and Rousseau and David Hume and Hobbes and so on, cobbled together into this experiment. The whole point, of course, of the separation of church and state is this was never good for religion or government to have them intertwined. That was a brand new experiment that had really never been run, and it has been a great success. Now, I'm just going to comment on something else. Let's go back, say, to your century, go back a century, and think about gay rights. You know, how long did it take for the idea that people that are attracted to people of the same sex rather than the opposite sex to be treated equally under the law as well as with dignity? It was 2015. 2015, okay? Obama and Hillary were both against gay marriage in 2011, okay? When you look back at how that revolution happened, and it's happened so recently, we can track it with polls, right? The majority of Americans were against the idea until 2011, and it started to shift, and by 2015, the Supreme Court decision made it. Now that that's happened, the whole should same-sex marriage be legal and so on, that whole debate will fade away just like interracial marriage debate. Interracial marriage was illegal up till 1967. Now, yes, you can find a few religious people charged with overturning the law and doing the right thing morally, but not very many. The same thing with the abolition of slavery. Yes, Wilberforce, yes, the Quakers, but who were their primary opponents? Their fellow religionists were totally against abolition of slavery. And they quoted from the scriptures in support. How do you explain that?
Well, first of all, I want to say one thing. And I think this is undertold and understood. I think that the idea that two lines from the Bible somehow interpreted, and I think actually misinterpreted, not totally mistranslated, I think it's actually to millions, many millions of gay, LGBTQ Christians, Jews, and Muslims, and I've met all three of those categories, who do think that they get their morals from the Bible. I think they would take some offense at that because there's essentially two sentences in the Bible, and I think the accurate description, which, by the way, when the conservative movement was deciding about homosexual marriage, the place of homosexuality in the conservative movement, they correctly, without dispute, said these two sentences refer to anal intercourse among two men. So here's the overriding way that the Bible works. You may or may not like it, but heterosexual sex is forbidden among a man and a woman during the woman having a period. So everything in the Bible, food is limited, kosher, food is limited, heterosexual sex is limited, and for whatever reason, anal intercourse is limited as well. I recommend seriously you consider reading Rabbi Stephen Greenberg's book, Wrestling with Man and God, which is by a Yeshiva University ordained Orthodox rabbi, who really goes through and explains. And I want to just say one more thing about this idea that anybody was killing homosexuals. In the Mishnah, the rabbis believed in the Bible so much that if they thought, by the way, the ancient rabbis thought people should be stoned or killed, they would do it, because that was their lifeblood. But they have a whole book, the fourth book of Bikurim, which talks about people of unclear sexual preferences. And I didn't even know there were that many unclear sexual preferences until I learned it, frankly. And nobody's talking about stoning, nobody's talking about doing anything. People are saying, well, here's how you observe these mitzvot this way and that way. The rabbis had a much more contextual understanding. They didn't kill anybody. I mean, Rabbi Jonathan said that a Sanhedrin that executed one person in 7 years was considered a violent Sanhedrin. So I just think a lot of people hear what you're saying, and it actually pains them to hear that, because they don't read the Bible the same way you read the Bible.
Okay, I have questions from the audience for both of you, one for each. To Michael Shermer, do you agree with Alan Dershowitz's book that the genesis of justice, that Western civilization's legal system is based on Genesis? And if you don't, where did you get your law degree? No, I'm just kidding. No.
Oh boy, I read Alan's book way back when, but I don't remember him making that argument. In any case, I mean, you can loosely say, well, these particular laws or these Bill of Rights statements kind of resemble the Old Testament statement here or there. Again, this is kind of presentism. This is like, here's what I think the problem is. Let me just be blunt. All of our moral values have shifted very gradually, just slowly enough you don't really notice it. Conservatives today are more liberal than liberals were in the 1950s, for example, without anybody really noticing just how conservatives think about Jews and blacks and women and so on. And all of that has shifted kind of from the bottom up, mostly just through culture, through literature, television, film, how we talk to each other, and so on. Now, if you believe that the particular religion that you adhere to has a book that was written by God, and you feel the need to, well, kind of square that circle with those scriptures that don't sound so good with our new moral inclusiveness, then you got to go back and kind of try to reread those scriptures. Well, what did he really mean? Well, what he really meant was we should treat gays and lesbians the same as straights. That isn't what was meant a century ago. No one would have read those passages that way a century ago. Why are you reading them that way now? Because all of us have had our moral consciousness raised, and not through scripture, not through new interpretations from God or anything like that.
Okay, Scott, when you say the atheist who believes in the golden rule is honored by you, aren't you conceding today's irrelevance of religion? If all you need is the golden rule, why do you need religion?
Okay, first I just want to say one thing. The Mishnah was written 2,000 years ago, and there's a written record on that in terms of gay and lesbians. Second, answering the question. My experience, well, let me say this. My belief, and I will say I can't fully back this up, but I will say that it's very hard to argue with someone, and I've done this on Wall Street, which is why the golden rule should be in effect. And more today, I see people who don't believe in the golden rule, and not being political for a moment, but it doesn't even seem like Republicans and Democrats want to treat each other as they would want to be treated themselves in this modern day era. And we have more and more people who think that what they want to do is dominate the other side. What they want to do is win, as opposed to treat the other, not do what the other person wants to them. And so I think we need religion, we need monotheism, not religion, because that could be idolatry too. We need monotheism to fix that.
Okay, to the person who asked, doesn't the Bible say that Jonah died in the belly of the fish and was resurrected? The answer is no. It does say that Elijah resurrected a child, so there is a resurrection actually in the Hebrew Bible, and also in the Midrash, Isaac actually dies in the Akedah and is resurrected, but that's in the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, and it's not actually in the Bible. So resurrection is not entirely foreign to the Hebrew Bible, but Jesus wasn't resurrected. Also, to the person who said, please submit my men's club membership and gave me their MasterCard number, I could give it back to Farshad, or I could just take it home and order some books. Right, but I would not be following the golden rule. So there is a card here that actually does honestly have a MasterCard number, which poses its own kind of moral question, but not, I think, one that I should answer publicly. Okay. All right. Let's see. Right, that one. Doesn't, to Michael Shermer, when you talked about community, the truth is that religion does provide communities. Do you think there is anything else that could possibly provide the kind of community that religion does, not just today, but generation after generation after generation? And if religion disappears, won't you lose that forever?
Yeah, maybe. It's hard to say because experiment's kind of new. The idea of not being a believer, being a secularist, that's pretty new. I mean, humanism is really not even a century old, really just since the 30s and 40s. The idea of having a community of people that don't believe in anything, that's pretty new. There are these Sunday meetings, there are these Unitarian, Universalist, humanist type groups that I speak at occasionally. They sing hymns to Newton, they light candles.
Are you serious?
Oh yeah, they have testimonials of how people lost their religion. Yeah, no, it's hilarious.
Hymns to Newton. Oh my God.
Now this isn't my thing. When I was religious, I was never really into church anyway. So, but the idea is people need some kind of community, a place to go to, right? So the idea that you have like a daycare center, you have a place for funerals and weddings and life transitions, this sort of thing. There's a lot of secular groups that are doing this now. There are secular weddings and funerals. There's whole books you can get that tell you how to do this and so on. But it's still fairly new. If you look at the projections by the sociologists of religion, the rise of the nuns, the people who tick the box for no religious affiliation. It's about 25% of all Americans, about 33% of millennials, about 40% of iGeners, kids born after 1995, okay? So if you carry that out, there's not going to be very many religious people left in about a century. Of course, trends that can't go on forever don't. That's an actual law. It's hard to say. I don't know. It's not like I think that we should do that. It's not religion per se as I mentioned. It's this kind of belief in the supernatural, belief in magic. Again, belief in the afterlife, I think, misses the point. It's this life that counts. I call this...
That's only true if there isn't an afterlife. You're presuming the answer in your point.
Well, but
you turned me off.
Yeah.
If there in fact is an afterlife, it does matter.
But no one knows for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's different from saying.
But no, it doesn't matter. And here's why. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I call this Alvy's error. Alvy Singer was Woody Allen's character in Annie Hall.
Brooklyn is not expanding.
And Brooklyn is not expanding. Right? He won't do his homework because the universe is expanding, and his mother yells at him. What's the universe got to do with it? We live in Brooklyn. Brooklyn's not expanding. We don't live in the afterlife. We live in this life. This is why, by the way, I think even religious people were not happy about Epstein's suicide. Because now, if you really believe in the afterlife and there's going to be this cosmic courthouse where God's going to sort it all out and evil people are going to be punished, you'd be happy he's gone. Good. God's, dealing with him right now. No, people are pissed because they wanted justice now in this life.
Right. Can I point out the error in that, though? The error in that is you're discussing whether people actually really believe in the afterlife. And what I'm saying is, if there is an afterlife, your statement is wrong. And you're saying, but we don't know if there is, so only this world matters. And I'm saying, you're right, presuming that you're right, there's no afterlife. But if you wake up on the other side and there is an afterlife, you go, oh my God, now I have all of eternity. That life is actually only a blip. And you will retroactively be wrong. I grant you that since we don't know, we should live in a way to deserve an afterlife, even though we don't know if there is one. But you have to concede that if there is one, you're not right.
You tell the rabbi study Talmud.
100% sure I followed that.
Well, then my work is done.
Because you're assuming that it's a good place that you want to go.
Well, that's the TV show.
Yes,
it's called The Good Place.
That's right.
All right, let me ask you actually.
What if it's like celestial North Korea? With a dictator that knows all your thoughts.
That's what Hitchens used to, yeah. Okay, let me actually ask you both about the future. Several people asked about things like, what is AI going to do to our conception of being human beings and to our conception of community? And what is the world going to be like in 50 or 100 years? For those of you who don't know about the power of AI, let me just give you one quick example. For years, they built chess computers until they finally got better than the best player in the world. And then an AI computer learned chess in a day by teaching itself and trained itself, and in 24 hours became better than the best computer was up to that point. So the power of AI is, which we're just beginning to realize, is going to be enormous and enormous. So what do you think that will do to religion and to society?
I think that's why we need morals and we need to control and decide what we're going to do with AI. I mean, AI can determine, and I actually talk about this a little bit in the book, which is it can determine your entire future. If it's let loose, because it'll decide what your credit score is, how much you're going to pay for a mortgage, how much insurance is going to cost, whether or not you're going to be hired for a job, because people look at FICO scores or whatever the AI score will be before they hire certain people. So I think that's actually exhibit A for why morality is so important. If the goal is, if the idea is just earn as much money as you can, then a corporation should just put AI into place, eliminate a lot of positions, deal with people however they are, and I further worry that if AI isn't controlled, it will become the most effective racist discriminator, racist and sexist discriminator, because even though it won't be technically allowed to, and you can program it, because I've been looking at this issue so that it doesn't know you're white, it doesn't know we're white males, it doesn't know you're black, it doesn't know you're a woman, it doesn't know anything. AI so strong in its algorithms, it will figure out, oh, that's class A, that's class B, and it will make those exact same segregating mistakes, and I mean them as moral mistakes. They may be actually accurate from the perspective of credit performance, etc. So that's actually why I think we need to put morals first.
I call this Shermer's last law, because you're not supposed to name laws after yourself, so it's the last time. Which is, any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial intelligence or far future human is indistinguishable from God. Any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial intelligence that we would encounter, or far future human, an AI, would be indistinguishable from God. This is just a play on Arthur C. Clarke's third law: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And so the idea that this future, far future AGI, to me, would be like what you think of as God. You know, if it could actually act in the world and do things. Now, I'm not too worried about this happening for all the dark reasons that the AI skeptics talk about, or the doomsayers, or the robo-apocalypse and all that. For this reason, that it's going to happen slow enough we can regulate it along the way. So, for example, I drive a Tesla. Now, when I get in my car tonight and I punch in and say, Tesla, take me home to Santa Barbara, whatever, I'm going down Wilshire Boulevard. Now, maybe there's traffic, because there's always traffic on Wilshire Boulevard. It's not going to go up on the sidewalk and plow through pedestrians, because that's the shortest way to get me home. Why? Because Elon programmed it in there, don't drive up on sidewalks. And if this did happen, how long would Tesla stay in business before the regulators, jumped on them, okay? I think that will happen at every step of the way that AI keeps growing and growing. Now, this idea that it'll suddenly take off in the singularity, it'll happen overnight, I don't think so. We've been talking about this for decades. It's a much harder problem than anyone realized. There's enough time for steps along the way to regulate it, to keep it from doing the evil, from discriminating against minorities and so on.
So a lot of the questions touch on things that we really have discussed in one way or another, so I want to ask you both a very broad general question about, to argue the other side. What do you think is the greatest flaw in religion, and what do you think is religion's greatest strength?
I think religion's greatest flaw is exactly the one that we argued about in the beginning, which is for folks to recognize false prophets, for folks to recognize the difference between idolatry and monotheism, because again, I think humanity's default mode is to believe in things, whether they make sense or not, and Dr. Shermer's written about people believing in all sorts of weird things, and I think the Bible's come to fix that, but that's clearly the biggest challenge to people, and it has happened in religion many, many times, too many times. And there have been horrors that religion has foisted upon humanity because people couldn't distinguish.
What's the greatest strength?
Greatest strength, I think, is when human communities morphed from these small bands and tribes into chieftains and states. There needed to be some institution to establish trust between strangers so that we could have some kind of smooth, lubricated economic, social community. And it was religion really first on the scene to do that, to lay down some rules that even if I don't know you and we're not genetically related, you're kin and kind and so on, that we should still do these following set of things. And here, everybody gets a copy. And if you break the rules, we have some police over here, and if you think you got away with it, there's an eye in the sky watching you, God, and so on. So really, I think the best thing religion has done is to make it possible for humans to live in large societies. Anything larger than a few hundred people, you need something like that. And so it was the first on the scene to run the experiments. Like, what are some of the deepest, most important moral rules? Do unto others as you would do, and so forth. The golden rule and its metallic derivatives, the silver rule. Do not do unto others as you would not do unto them, and so forth.
Okay, last two general questions. If there's no God, should we still be religious?
No. if I were certain there was no God, it might be nice to have an organizing community. I might want a community for all the reasons that Dr. Shermer mentioned, but no.
Really? It's like, don't you know secular Jews that are into the culture, Jewish culture, and they don't believe in God?
Yeah, I'm saying I might like community and the like, but I certainly
Well, but
wouldn't.
that's still
Not a
religion.
religion, no. It's
I think
eating
that's
Chinese food on Christmas Eve.
No, it's
Lots
not
of
more than
things.
Chinese. Oh, come on.
And if,
I can't believe I'm
for
defending
you,
the Jewish.
right, exactly.
Not Jewish.
For you, if there is a God, would you live your life differently?
Probably not on a day-to-day basis. I might think about long-term planning differently, like that afterlife thing. Maybe. I'd like to think that I act toward other people just because it's the right thing to do and not because of the promise of an afterlife or somebody's watching or for whatever reason like that. I think it might change what I do on Sunday mornings, maybe, or Saturdays, or whichever one it was. You know the Dorothy Parker line about, why she doesn't go to church on Sundays? I probably shouldn't say it. It's a little, no.
You're among friends.
Because I'm too fucking busy and vice versa.
And just because this is a synagogue, I'm going to close with a different joke. I'm going to end this. This is the first time I've moderated one of these debates, but I've participated in lots of them. And the first one I ever did was many years ago with Stephen Jay Gould, who was the late lamented Stephen Jay Gould. And I began with the following story. So it's the end of history, and human beings look up at God and they say, listen, we've done everything that you ever did. We don't need you anymore. We have all the skills, all the science, all the everything. We can do everything you do. You're basically dispensable. God says, really? They said, yes. He says, you can do everything I can do? They said, absolutely. God says, you can make a human being out of dust? They said, no problem. God said, okay, let's see. The scientist reaches down, scoops up the earth, and God says, you get your own dust. So thank you to Scott Shay and Michael Shermer, and thank you all of you, and the